Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another video. So, boxing has been pretty quiet over the past couple of weeks. There's not really been a whole lot to talk about, and I considered doing a live stream this weekend, but I wasn't really sure what to say or what topic to discuss because there really wasn't anything that caught my interest. But one story that a lot of people have been talking about is the fight that took place last night between Tszyu and Tony Harrison. It wasn't a fight that I personally had any interest in, so I never did a video for it. I never even talked much about it. I just thought the fight was a foregone conclusion, to be honest. It went exactly how I thought it would. I think it went exactly how most people thought it would. Tony Harrison is a decent boxer, former champion, a guy who's been around a long time. In fact, funnily enough, Tony Harrison actually made his pro debut, if I'm not mistaken, on the undercard of Vladimir Klitschko versus David Hayes. So yeah, that's how long Tony Harrison's been around. He made his pro debut in Germany back in the day. So yeah, that was quite interesting. But yeah, he's been around a long time. He's a talented guy. He's tall, he's slick, he's got good straight punches, a good jab. He's got decent speed, decent power, but he's always been very fragile. Even in his prime, he never had a great chin. I mean, he was knocked out by, I think it was Willie Nelson who knocked him out, if I'm not mistaken. And he was, of course, knocked out in the rematch by Charlo. So, yeah, after winning the first fight. So, yeah, Tony Harrison was nothing special. He was a good opponent for Tszyu at this stage of his career. But, it wasn't really anything that I thought was too big a step up for him. I mean, it's interesting because Tszyu is a fighter who I kind of changed my opinion on, because when I first heard of Tszyu and when I first saw clips of him and whatnot, I really wasn't impressed. I saw him as a guy who basically was just another in a long list of sons of boxing legends who never lived up to their father's name, if you know what I mean, like Chavez Jr. being the prime example of that. There are other examples, Chris Eubank Jr., Marvis Fraser, George Foreman the third, a whole bunch of fighters that just never lived up to their all-time great father's name, the all-time great father status. And I just kind of thought that Tszyu would be another one of them. I kind of thought he was just another Chavez Jr., I thought he would get to a certain level, domestically, but then when he had a step-up fight, or when he had a genuine fight of consequence, he would just get taken out. That ultimately hasn't happened yet. He's actually gone a little bit further than I expected. He was able to beat the likes of Jeff Horn and Michael Zarafa and now Tony Harrison. These are guys that I would not have expected him to beat around about the time I first heard about him and around about the time he turned pro. So yeah, he's gone a little bit further on in his career than I thought he would have. However, a lot of people, in my opinion, are getting a little bit prematurely excited, if you know what I mean, because I'm seeing a lot of people out there, and I mean a lot of people, who seem to be very, very genuinely excited by this guy, and they seem to think that he's not only got a good chance of beating Jermell Charlo, but that he's going to go in there and he's going to beat him convincingly. A lot of people seem to think that this guy's got Charlo's number, and that he's going to be his toughest fight and maybe even take the title from him. Now, Charlo is a guy who is obviously very well respected. I mean, his record speaks for itself. Whatever you think about the guy, I mean, he's undisputed champion. He's got a high knockout percentage. He's a big guy for the division, big puncher, tall, decent long-range boxer. I've never really rated him that highly personally. I don't think he's that technically astute, but he's a hard guy to fight just based on his size and his length and his power. In addition to the fact that he's pretty much always the A side, when you fight one of these like black Americans on a PBC card, it's very difficult to get a fair shake. So when he goes up against someone who is a match for him, someone like Brian Castano, who is able to outbox him and is able to beat him, the judges in America are there to bail him out. So yeah, Charlo's a guy who commands a lot of respect. He's got a lot of political protection, and he has a lot of natural physical ability. And so far, even though he's not undefeated, because he lost to Tony Harrison in a very close fight, which was quite bizarre. I was surprised that he didn't get the decision that night, but of course he was able to avenge his defeat and won conclusively by knockout in the rematch. So yeah, there's a lot to look at there with Charlo. You know, there's a lot that you can say that the guy definitely commands respect. So when I see a lot of people picking Tszyu to win that fight, I really think that's a bit of a stretch, if I'm being honest. Like, if that fight's in America, particularly if it happens in a place like Texas, where we know for a fact that there's going to be a unprecedented amount of corruption, and we know that it's very, very difficult to get a fair shake in America. You know, to me, I don't really see anything from Tszyu that tells me that he's going to go in there and he's going to do what needs to be done to take the undisputed title from Charlo. I mean, you know, he could maybe emulate what Brian Castano did in the first fight. You know, that educated pressure, high guard, cutting off the ring, shifting, maybe kind of cutting off the ring and trapping Charlo in the corners, trapping him on the ropes and kind of beating him to the body and catching him in between his own combinations, countering over the jab with a right hand, stuff like that, that he was able to do in his fights against the likes of Tony Harrison. But it's going to be very difficult to do, because if he does fight Charlo, there's going to be a lot of things that just don't suit him. You know, Charlo's the bigger, taller, longer guy. Charlo's also got the significantly more decorated pedigree. You know, he's a guy who's considerably more experienced. You know, he was a very highly touted amateur. He's a guy who's had over 30 professional fights, I believe. You know, he's a guy who's fought in several world title fights now. He's definitely fought the better competition of the two. I mean, I don't really know if Tszyu would be able to beat the likes of Castano, for example. You know, we haven't seen him at that level yet. I mean, beating Tony Harrison is one thing, but I think Tony Harrison is at a stage of his career where he's on his way out, and he was never that tough to begin with. Like I said earlier, Tony Harrison was always somewhat fragile. So yeah, it's all well and good fighting in Australia with the momentum on his side, with the crowd on his side, and a guy like Tony Harrison who was brought in as a measuring stick, you know, brought in as an opponent. It makes sense that he was able to win that fight. But if he's going in there against a guy like Jermell Charlo, a guy who is the A-side, who's pretty much at his prime, who is going to be fighting at home with the referee and judges on his side, I think we're going to need to see something very special from Tszyu in order for him to win that fight. You know, I can't see him just going in there and doing a number on Charlo. I can't see him getting a fair decision either. I think what we're going to have to see is we're going to have to see a Triple G, Sergey Kovalev type of thing that he's bringing to the party. Like, he's going to have to come there to upset the party. You know, we're going to have to see a knockout, and we're going to have to see a conclusive victory. And from what I see from Tszyu at the moment, I don't really think he has anything special. Like, I don't think he's bringing anything to the table that Charlo hasn't dealt with before. I mean, is Tszyu a better fighter than Brian Castano? Is he? I mean, he could be, for all I know, but I haven't seen anything that lets me know. I mean, he's had some good wins, you know, beating the likes of course, Tony Harrison, but everything he's done so far has been domestic level, as far as I'm concerned. So it's an interesting fight, and this isn't necessarily a prediction video. This is just my early thoughts. Obviously, the fight hasn't even been signed yet. I don't even think it's even in negotiation yet. So we'll have to wait and see, but there's always a chance that the fight might not be real. I mean, I pretty much, with all the experience I've had of watching boxing over the years, being disappointed by fights that get built up over a certain period of time. And this is a fight that's been talked about for a couple years now. So I'm wondering if there'll be some sort of agreement, and I'm wondering if it'll even be a real fight. But that's neither here nor there. Assuming that it is a real fight, I'm still going to have to see more from Tszyu in order for me to favour him. So, yeah, it's an interesting situation. And yeah, I definitely felt like talking about it, because I do think Tszyu is one of these guys who he's going to be very, very easy to market. Obviously, his dad was very, very popular. He was a very, very good and very exciting fighter, and he was very underrated too. Like Tszyu is actually one of my favorite like retro fighters to go back and watch. Like him in his prime was fantastic. But yeah, and I'd recommend you watch like his fights against Zab Judah, his fights against what was his name, Shamba Mitchell. Go and watch those fights, like clinical performances from Tszyu. He was a great fighter, and yeah, based on the name recognition, he's obviously already got a decent following in Australia, hasn't he? And he's obviously got a lot of Russian fans too. So yeah, he'll have a big following, but does he have a big enough following and enough of a political presence to get a fair shake against someone like Charlo? I'm not sure. It's an interesting fight. It's a fascinating fight, and I am somewhat excited for just hearing people break it down and hearing people analyze the technicalities of it, because that's something I've not really seen a lot of lately in the YTBC. I mean, the YTBC is kind of dead at the moment, isn't it? There's really not the same kind of content. There's not the same kind of community anymore, and it makes making boxing videos kind of boring and kind of a waste of energy. But this situation here, I've noticed it's kind of picked up a bit of a buzz, and a lot of people seem to be interested in it. I saw Blood Boxing made a live stream about it earlier today, and a few people were making videos about it too. People who have been kind of inactive, have been a bit taken in by this fight. So yeah, it's interesting, man. Let me know what you guys think anyway. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more boxing content, and yeah, God bless.